And then my next flight after that, I was nervous. And I remember specifically like a flight attendant came by and was like, "Would you like something to drink?" And I was like, I can't move right now. Like I'm holding on for dear life. And I was like, okay, something's happened here.
'Cause I'm leaving on a chocolate. Don't know when I'll be back again. Oh, babe, I have to go.
All right, folks, from the Flight Deck Podcast, a Dial a Pilot show, we're here with Kristin. She's a nervous flyer that we've been working with for maybe a year now. We'll get into that here in just a second, but I do need to point out that this episode is brought to you by Safety Wing Insurance, which we're going to get into that a little bit later. But Kristin, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Absolutely. So I said a year that you've been working with us. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. There was a particular instance that happened about a year ago that was sort of the trigger of like, okay, this is out of control. We need some help. And then I stumbled across you guys on social media, and that's sort of what kicked it off. So
Gotcha. And it wasn't the actual flap failure that was kind of the trigger to actually start working with us. Is that right?
No, it wasn't. So what happened was about a year ago, I was on a flight. I had flown out to Colorado with my husband for a ski trip. We flew out ahead of a work trip for him, and I was going to fly back by myself. So he could stay out there for work and I'd fly back on my own. And I was boarded on the plane. Our stuff was checked. I was in first class. It was an early morning flight. And I was so panicked that as the plane was taxiing out, I was like, I have to get off this plane. I can't do this right now. And so I panicked, stood up while they were taxiing, and flight attendants were like, "What's wrong? What's going on?" I was like, I need to get off the plane. Like, I absolutely have to get off the plane. And I was texting my husband, and he was like, he's like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm not there. I don't know what to, and I was like, I have to get off the plane. I'm going to have a panic attack. I have to get off. And so they had to bring the plane back to the gate, bring the jet bridge back over, and let me off the plane. Our stuff was checked. We had 2 bags checked. I had no plans of another flight. I didn't even look. I was like, I had to get off. I was like, I can't do this right now. And that was sort of the like, okay, this is really bad. This has now taken like a turn that we no longer, this isn't just fear of flying now. We've now progressed to like, this is not okay. And also when you stand up on a flight and you're about to delay a flight, probably or 20, 30 minutes, and the passengers look at you with just sort of hate in their heart. And I was like, I don't even care. I just can't do this. I can't fly right now. And so that was sort of the like, all right, we've got a real problem here that's not getting better. We need to look into other options. And so I started looking on social media, and then I stumbled across you guys and then gave you a call.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not an awesome story as far as, the trauma that you had going on there. And I'm sure that jumping off of an airplane and dealing with all the passengers and all that stuff is probably not a very fun situation to be a part of, but, we're certainly grateful that you found us and that we found you. And, I know that I personally have had a blast working with you. We've had quite a few conversations through your journey from running off an airplane to learning to fly them, which is amazing from a standpoint of, my own perspective and starting the service. And one of my dreams was to take somebody from being very afraid of flying to actually wanting to learn to fly and sharing that passion for aviation with other folks. And for some reason, I thought if we could do it with somebody that just really, really hates flying, we probably have done a decent job here. And so whenever I talk to folks about how the service is going and, friends of mine that are not afraid of flying or maybe are a little bit, but they want to know how the business is going, you're always the story I bring up. I'm like, this is so cool. And it's so fun for me to watch and be a part of. So we're just proud of you. And it's amazing. I mean, that's quite the story. So, and we'll get into it, but backing up a little bit, your fear of flying started after a specific event. Is that right?
Yeah. So in 2018, I was on a red-eye flight from Alaska, flying back. We were going to connect at Denver, and then I was going to make it back to the East Coast. And we were in the air for 45 minutes. And at this point, I was traveling once a month for work. I was traveling all the time. I was in my 20s, like didn't think anything about flying. And so we were in the air for about 45 minutes, and I was admittedly like falling asleep. I think it was like midnight. And the pilot came on and was like, hey, we're having a mechanical issue. We have to turn back around and we need to get back on the ground back in Anchorage. And I was like, okay, well, this is pretty inconvenient, but like, I'm starting to get a little nervous now. I don't know what's going on. And they said, like, listen, it's a thing we train for all the time. We'll get back to you once we have more information. So they did. They turned around. You could feel that happening. And then we made our way back to Anchorage. And the pilot came back on and was like, hey, we're going to make what we call a no flap landing. And they're like, we train for this all the time, but we're going to let you know we're going to land fast and it's going to feel fast, but you need to listen to the flight attendants. And so at this point, you're starting to kind of look around, look left to right, and passengers are clearly nervous, right? Everyone's starting, like, we all went from like half asleep to a red eye flight to like everyone's like sitting up and it's silent on the plane. And so you can feel we're starting to descend, and it definitely feels different. And then the flight attendants start screaming, brace for impact. And they have everybody go in a brace position. And now everyone's looking around, and flight attendants are screaming at you to brace for impact.
Oh, yeah.
And all you think of is like, this is it. Like, this is it. We're about to crash. I have no idea what's going on. We're going to crash. And so we definitely land fast, and the landing was rough. And there was stuff flying. Everyone, when we opened overhead bins, once we, got there and settled, there was stuff everywhere. And it was a rough landing. But it was fine. And we all walked off the plane fine. It was okay. But in that few minutes where we were descending and landing, I mean, we were being screamed at to brace for landing, and no one had any idea what was really going on. And then, so we deplane, we get off. It was a few hours later, and they just sort of announced like, okay, we fixed the plane. You're going to get back on the plane now. And everybody was like, it's been a couple hours. And so we're in Alaska, and I'm sitting there like, is there a train I can take? Like, what's the rental car? Like, I'm in Alaska to East Coast. Like, there are no options. Like, the only option here is to get back on the plane. So we get back on the plane, and I was nervous. I was definitely nervous, but it was sort of like, all right, I've been awake for 24 hours at this point. Like, this is the only option. And they never explained to us what happened. And then my next flight after that, I was nervous. And I remember specifically, like, a flight attendant came by and was like, would you like something to drink? And I was like, I can't move right now. Like, I'm holding on for dear life. And I was like, okay, something's happened here. And then it progressively got worse. And then admittedly, 2020 happened, and I didn't fly really much during 2020. And then it got really, really bad. So typically flights, I'm hysterical crying, full-blown panic attacks so bad that flight attendants will get me up out of my seat and put me in a different seat where they could be by me. I have accommodations from work to make sure I always sit in the front of the plane. We plan travel around my flight stress. So it was a specific incident that happened, and that sort of triggered the whole thing. But now that I understand what that specific incident was, it was sort of like, well, why didn't you just tell me that's all it was all those years ago? And I always think back, like, how many other passengers on that flight are struggling with the fear of flying now, when if we were just told what happened, we could understand that it wasn't as big of a deal and it wouldn't have impacted everybody's life. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I've often thought about, because in so many of the calls that we take, it's a similar story, that there was some instance that happened or some, life event that occurred. And whenever it's something that happened like that, it's usually just that one little missing piece of information that is like, yes, this was a mechanical irregularity, but the airplane was fine because the airplane is built for this. So just for those listening, what Kristin experiences what's called a flap failure. And so on the airplane, we obviously have the wings. That's what creates the lift that keeps the airplane in the air. Well, when we fly really fast, we want that wing to be as clean as we possibly can. We want it to be streamlined to go fast, just like a swimmer diving into the water for a race. We want to be as tight as we can, as fast as we can. That's why air travel is so efficient. Well, at slow speeds, we need to change the shape of the wing in order to be able to take off and land. So when we're taking off, we'll set the flaps at any setting between essentially up and usually about 15 to 20 degrees of flaps on a Boeing product. Airbus is a little bit different, but what you'll see as a passenger is you'll actually see, if you're sitting over the wing, you'll kind of hear a mechanical whirring noise as they move. And on the front of the wing, you'll see a little piece of metal that kind of looks like a cuff, if you will, actually coming out and extending. And on the back of the wing, which is the flaps, you'll see those extending as well. It kind of elongates the wing, makes it more of a rounded shape, if you will. And that's what gives us that increased lift, also increases the drag on the airplane. So when we're landing, we'll use a higher setting, something like flaps 20, 25, 30, or 40, all depending on the airplane. And of course, Airbus is a little bit different. I'm a Boeing pilot, though, so that's what I can speak to. But that's what we use them for. Now, when they are deploying on the wings, there's a number of factors that go into how they actually deploy. The aircraft is watching itself all the time to make sure that we don't have any incorrect or asymmetrical deployment of those flaps, because we don't want to introduce a side-to-side motion that is uncommanded, if you will. So when those flaps go out, if for some reason it detects that one is going out faster than the other, meaning the right flap is going out faster than the left flap, that would stop them right in their spot. So they only get maybe a half a degree of separation and they will stop, and we cannot bring them back up. We cannot put them down further. They're stuck in an intermediate position. In an event like that, we get a notification. They'll say flap asymmetry, flap disagree, something along those lines. It depends on the nature of the mechanical irregularity. There's a checklist that we go to, and we just follow the checklist, and it tells us exactly what to do. Okay, the flaps are jammed between flaps position 1 and flaps position 5. Okay, this is the exact speed we want you to land at. This is how much longer your landing distance is going to be than normal. So we factor all of those things in, and we make a decision to either go back to our flight or our origin, or it would be rare that we would continue to the destination unless it was actually, this happened while we were landing. So there are a couple of different ways that this could occur. Now, in Kristin's case, they decided to go back to Anchorage. Anchorage has plenty long runways. Very good decision. But that's the kind of nature of what happens. So depending on where those flaps where the mechanical condition happened, they may have landed 40 knots, which is about 48 miles per hour, 50 miles per hour faster than you normally would. And you would notice that. And Kristin, do you remember what kind of airplane this was on?
I don't, and I wish I do, but I
think you told
me
it was does a 737 sound familiar?
Yeah, I think it was. It was a fairly large aircraft. I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah.
Gotcha. And the 737 lands fast to begin with. So all of a sudden you have that flap asymmetry, and from a, and of course the 737 safe, it's a normal landing speed for that airplane, albeit it's faster than other airplanes like a 777, which is kind of counterintuitive when you think about how big a 777 is. But what I'm getting at here is it would feel way, way, way faster to land with the speeds in which you're approaching the runway in Kristin's case. Now, in addition to that, because we're going faster, we need to brake harder when we land. So on the airplane, we have a system called the auto brakes. We can set them between 0 and max, and it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, max. Now, a max auto brake landing is rough in the sense that when you hit the ground, it applies those brakes really hard. It's all calculated by the computer. We have an anti-skid system. All of these different calculations go into it. It's perfectly fine on the airplane, perfectly fine on the brakes, perfectly fine on the tires. But from a passenger standpoint, it's a pretty pronounced deceleration, if you will. So I can imagine that all the stuff in the overhead bids went forward. Everybody was like, what's going on here? And in addition, you've got the flight attendants yelling brace. That would be scary for anybody. Yeah. If I'm sitting in the back, I'm not going to like that either. So I totally understand, but the importance of a debrief after a situation like that, I think is just couldn't be more important as far as, hey, what was that? Why did we have to brace? And that comes down to flight deck decision, and you coordinate that amongst each other, and it's a briefing item. And hey, do we want to have a brace here? Maybe the runway was slick from snow or something like that. It's just an abundance of caution approach. So that's kind of a captain to captain decision, if you will. So just to kind of paint the picture of what Kristin was actually experiencing, that's the idea behind a flap failure. And it is a quite extensive checklist. We do train for it all the time. Whenever we go through our flight training, that is one of the things that we do over and over again, is that flap failure. So yeah, certainly a hair-raising incident for you there, Kristin. And then you made it back to the East Coast that same night, though. Is that right?
So I ended up missing a lot of connections. It was a big 36-hour travel day. I did make it back to the East Coast eventually. But as I said, then because I was traveling a fair amount at that point, and then the next flight after that, I was like, this is different. This doesn't feel the same. I'm all of a sudden really, really scared. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Did you feel, were you kind of like waiting on edge, would you say, or what was the?
Yeah. Anytime too, I felt the plane drop or any sort of quick descent, I definitely was like, what is that? Why are we doing that? What's going on? And then it just kept getting progressively worse. So I tried a couple different things. Admittedly, I tried some medication, which made it worse for me. Tried some therapy. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. We just tried a couple things. And it was really sort of the combination of learning as much as I can and really understanding what actually happened. That was sort of the like, oh, this is the thing that's going to do it. Because I travel enough for work. I work for a company that actually does air traffic control systems, a company named Leidos, and we do air traffic control. So I can see sort of the inside of how the systems work. And it was really learning more about the airplane and the flight operations and really working with your team that sort of was like, oh, this isn't a big deal. So I did a call initially with Brett, one of your pilots, when we realized like, all right, this is something I should try. And that first call, my confidence going into that flight was like 100 times higher than it had been. I was like, okay, wow. I can do this.
That's cool.
I remember he was like, flying is like a magic carpet ride. And his just sort of infectious enthusiasm about flying, I was like, okay, like there are people that like this. This isn't this miserable thing. There's people out there that actually enjoy this experience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so that really, really helped. And then you and I connected and we talked and you walked me through what a no flap landing was. And I was like, well, that makes sense. Like that makes total sense. That wasn't actually unsafe. I just didn't understand it at the time. So that was sort of the progression. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Brett is just, he's so phenomenal. I love talking to him. He sends me messages all the time. We always share back and forth, stories of clients that he's worked with that send him text messages, photos of their family on vacation. And he's just so excited about working with everybody and so excited to be a part of everybody's journey that the fact that he was the first person you talked to, I think is just, it's fantastic because he's such the right guy for that. And like you said, his passion for aviation truly is infectious. So just a shout out to Brett there. And he goes by Mav. If I don't know if he told you that, but that was his nickname long before Top Gun ever came out. So he's the original Mav.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So tell us now how, even before you started flying, tell us how were the progression of actually getting on flights, going to work events and things of that nature. Obviously, you know a lot about the air traffic control system, which is always fun to talk to you about because you see a lot more of the inside scoop than we do. You understand the back end of it, which it's always fun.
So it's been an interesting progression. So it got better. And there were definitely still things I had to work through because at that point it was also just like working through sort of the bracing and the trauma of that. So I had to work through that on my own. Admittedly, that was some therapy too. But I think I'm a big like team of people person. So I think you need like a whole team. So, but working with your team, I was doing calls before every flight. And especially I fly through Denver a lot. And that Denver is historically a pretty tricky airport. It's pretty bumpy. Yeah, it's bumpy. And I would find that even if I kind of knew and talked through what turbulence was, calling one of the pilots before and being like, hey, I'm flying tomorrow. Like, what do you see? Help me understand what you see, what you think I'm going to run into. And just sort of having that extra peace of mind was really helpful. I progressively got better and better. I remember, I think at some point I texted you and I was like, I just flew and I didn't cry. And that was like a huge milestone. Because when I say I would cry, I mean, I was sobbing, hysterical. Like, I travel with coworkers and I'd be like, hey, heads up. You're going to see me absolutely hysterical. I just need you to know that I'm okay. This is just the way I travel. Like, just understand that this is what happens.
Props to you for keeping going. That is not easy.
And I mean, I really travel about twice a month. which we love to travel, you know, in our personal life. My husband and I love to travel as well. We love to go to Montana. We're from the East Coast, so that's a pretty big travel day. So there was a lot of steps that we sort of put in. You know, I do things like I would tell the flight attendants, like, hey, I'm nervous. Can you just like let me know? You know, just check in with me every once in a while. That was really helpful. And then it was actually your team that I think it was you who was like, you should go talk to the pilots. And so then I would try to sneak up front and go talk to the pilots. And pilots are so excited when you go to talk to them.
We love it.
So
we
excited.
love it.
Yeah. So that was really helpful because then you can feel sort of this like infectious energy for like, we love our job and flying is so cool. And then it did become like, well, wait a second. They all love this so much. Why am I back here so miserable? And it did slowly get better over time. I'm happy to report I haven't run off of any planes in a year now. I haven't left our stuff checked and bolted off a plane. We haven't missed any connections because I was sobbing in the airport and couldn't get on a plane because that's happened before. My husband loves when that happens. I'm able to fly. And sometimes I'll admit there's some tears. Like if we hit some turbulence, I still get nervous. But I do a dial-up pilot call almost every flight. And I do find sometimes the flight home is a little more stressful for me because I think that's when my incident happened. And I'll always just check in because it's such a confidence booster. You're like, oh, wow, these people love flying so much. Right. Why am I so scared? So, and then, you know, I did the March course with you and really dug into learning more. And that's also been really, really helpful. And that's sort of what started and kicked off this whole journey.
Yeah, that was really fun. That was the first time we've ever done something like that. And it was so fun to have a group of folks kind of all going through it together, supporting each other, and to be able to really break down, hey, this is how aviation works. And, you know, one of the things that I see all the time is people want somebody tracking them when they're actually, you know, on the airplane. A lot of folks have mentioned that. And I remember one of the courses we talked about it, and it was like, there's a lot of people tracking this airplane, and they're sitting in Chicago, Atlanta, Denver, all over the place watching us. We're downlinking all of our information from the airplane to the maintenance controllers that see exactly what's going on. I mean, it's amazing at how robust this aviation industry is, and for very good reason. I mean, it is a complex industry, and safety needs to be the number one priority. And so being on the other side of the flight deck door, you know, the front side of the flight deck door, and seeing all of that, it's really a good reminder for us too, as the pilots, to go, oh, okay, we know all of this stuff that goes on, but for somebody that gets on a metal tube that really has a 30-degree view outside of the window, it's really hard to understand all that goes into it. And not only pilot training, flight attendant training, dispatcher training, maintenance training, what the airplanes go through, how they're certified to go over land or over the water, and the differences associated with all those things. So it was so fun to walk through all of that and just see everybody kind of understand it and ask questions around it. And from a personal standpoint, I loved it. And of course, your input on the air traffic control side of things was so fun to hear too, in implementing these different systems in which we were seeing on the flight side and how we're navigating what we call the next gen system. You had so much insight on that. So that was really cool to see.
I think too, it was really helpful because there are little like nuggets that I took from that. Number one, I think it's really helpful when you realize that you're not alone, right? Like, because there are times where I would be hysterical crying and I was like, this is embarrassing. Everyone around me seems perfectly fine. And like, this is a very smooth 90-minute flight to Orlando and I'm hysterical. Like, so I think when you do start to connect with other people who are really struggling with something and you realize that you're not alone, like there's a lot of people who struggle with the fear of flying. I think a lot more people than you even realize. I think that is also really, really helpful. But then like the little extra nuggets, like having somebody from maintenance and operations come and talk to us about just sort of the process and learning that pilot can refuse a flight. I know that I had, I think once again, we talked about it, a flight on the way back from LA and the pilot came, it was a red eye. So we're all half asleep and the pilot came on and was like, we need to start the engine differently. We can't get it up and running. And I know a year ago, I would have run off that plane so fast, but you were like, no, a pilot can refuse a plane. Like if they don't think it's airworthy, they can say, I'm not flying this. And I knew, okay, well, that wasn't the best way to communicate that. But if they didn't think it was safe, they would have said, I'm not flying this. So I'm just going to trust that that pilot is accepting this aircraft for whatever reason. And the reason we have to start it differently is something I don't understand. But then I know we got back on the ground and you were my first call. I was like, what just happened? Explain this to me. I need to understand what happened. Yeah. So
yeah. On that note, to throw something, to talk about that, yes, pilots can refuse an airplane. We do have that option. And it's non-punitive. If we refuse an airplane, nobody's coming for us. Our job is to be that last line of defensive safety. And if we decide that, hey, this is not the right airplane on the right day for the right job, that's fine. That is what we are, essentially paid to do. Yeah. Now, what you experienced is not uncommon. We have what's called minimum equipment lists, and something can be broken on the airplane or not working correctly. And the FAA, the aircraft manufacturers, and the airlines have all gotten together and said, okay, if these specific systems are not working, the airplane can still be dispatched under these different circumstances. And so there's a whole list of circumstances in which we can use. The minimum equipment list is categorized in 4 different categories. They all dictate how long the aircraft can operate with that specific problem. In your case, what was likely happening was the way we start the engines is we actually have a small jet engine that sits in the tail of the airplane. It's called the auxiliary power unit, the APU. When we're on the ground, we'll start that. It provides the electrical power to the airplane. It also provides the air conditioning to the airplane. Well, when we push back from the gate, we're now disconnected from all ground sources. When we push back and they say, you're clear to start the engines, we'll turn the air conditioning off. We'll take the air that was used for the air conditioning. We'll route it into the engine like an air compressor. That spins the engine fast enough that we can actually inject fuel, the spark, and get the engine going. That valve that controls that can be inoperative, and we can do a start via a different method. There's actually 2 different methods that we can do. There's a cross-bleed start or an external air cart start. Now, all of those things to say, we kind of get into now we're getting a little bit verbose in how we're explaining things, over the PA system. You don't want to add more concern. And so what happens for a lot of us in the flight deck is we go, okay, these are all frequent flyers, as are we. And so you're kind of talking to folks almost like they don't care, when in reality, most people do care. So, I go the route of not necessarily over explaining, but just kind of adding some context. This is what we're doing. This is why it's fine. This is why it's a little bit different. So that was likely what you were experiencing or something along those lines. So again, just for the listener, but sounds like you have something to add on that.
Yeah. So I think, for me, it was sort of like, well, we're all sitting back here and I don't know what it means that you can't get the engine started or you're starting it differently. I immediately am like, oh, you're jumping it up there. You've got jumper cables on this thing and that's how you're starting it. And how do I know this thing isn't going to turn off in the middle of the air? But like knowing and the knowledge that I had picked up through the course was like, well, no, that's not what's happening. And if it was what's happening, this person could say, I'm not flying today. This isn't safe. And they could refuse it. And it's a lot of those small bits of information that you don't know as a passenger. And there's really no way to find them out unless you sort of go through a course or do all this research on your own. And that's sort of when I started to realize that for me, knowledge is sort of how I'm going to get through this. Knowledge is sort of going to be the answer to how I'm going to overcome this sort of thing that kind of controls my life in a lot of ways. And that's going to be the only way for me that I'm really going to kind of get through this. And so that was sort of when the seed was planted that maybe I should learn to fly a plane. Maybe
which
that
is so cool.
Is the logical next step.
I will never forget that phone call. Like, I figured out my capstone. I'm going to learn to fly. Like, yes, I was like, let's do it.
This is just a nice way to end this and kind of be done with it. And also, like, is this a little crazy? It was a little crazy at first, for sure. But I think like the knowledge is power thing. And the more you know about what's going on, if you're a nervous flyer, that really seems to, I think, help you kind of get through it, right? Because you're in the know, you understand the noises, you understand why we're starting the engine differently, you understand if something happens, you do understand the redundancy of systems and sort of the process of how things work. So that was kind of the thing that was like, I have this idea. I wonder if I should do this.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And how's it going so far?
It's going well. I actually flew twice this past weekend. I'll admit I did not actually do much of the flying. So I've gone up, I guess I have about 10 flight hours now. It's a process. It's going to be a process for sure. And I found a fantastic flight instructor who I meshed with. I did a couple different discovery flights and kind of clicked with one. And it's fun. And I will say the first 2 flights we did in the small plane, I was terrified.
I bet.
I was terrified. And I definitely was like, this is a horrible idea. Why on earth did I think I was going to do this? I'm so scared. I could barely keep my eyes open. Like, forget it. And the first discovery flight I did, the instructor was like, do you want to fly? I was like, absolutely not. Not even a little bit. I don't want to touch that thing. I was like, if you want to turn around and put us back on the ground, I'm okay with that. Like, get me off.
That's funny.
Off this plane right now. And then now as I said, I did a couple of different discovery flights, and I did find a flight instructor that I really clicked with, and he's so patient. But he's pushed me a little bit. He's definitely pushed me a little bit, but we're doing basic maneuvers and I'm flying a plane. And, this weekend I was like, explain takeoff to me, like walk me through this now, because I really want to do this. So I'm definitely more comfortable at the 6 o'clock in the morning time because it's less bumpy. I don't love the bumps. Yeah. So, but this weekend we flew 2 days in a row in mild to moderate chop, and he made some 30-degree bank turns. And I looked out the window the whole time and we talked, and I didn't hold on for dear life. And, part of me is always like, oh, I should have flown more. But part of me is also like, I was running off planes a year ago. I was terrified of planes a year ago. And I'm really, really committed. And I'm going to try to solo my first plane in 2025. And I'm working my way through ground school. And I'm really enjoying it, which is shocking because a flight used to be a really traumatic thing that I would fly and it would take me a couple days to recover, both physically and mentally. And it was a lot of work. And I have, I think, 5 more flight lessons booked over the next couple weeks, and we're going up at least once a week. If I can, I'll sneak in a twice a week flight. And yeah, so I'm getting my pilot's license.
Now you're voluntarily getting on an airplane that you have to fly. You can't even take the, the easy route out of just closing your eyes. So no, it's just spectacular. And I'll never forget, some of my favorite messages that I've gotten in the last year from you. And it's, you in the jump seat of the 777 headed to Denver or something like that with the pilots. Obviously you're on the ground, you haven't taken off, but it's just so fun to see you having that passion for aviation, or at least that interest in aviation. Passion may be a strong term so far, but I think you're getting closer, because you will text me questions about, different airplanes, and it's just so fun. And, I know I've said this a million times, but it continues to be true. I'm so proud of the progress that you've made, and in watching you, do these steep turns and tell me about your experience with it. And it was moderate chop, and your adventures and, taxiing the airplane and taking off and landing. And it's really cool. I mean, to go from literally running off of airplanes while they're taxiing out, that is, you have 20 minutes to make a decision.
That's bad.
Right.
Like skis and suitcase checked. No idea if there's another flight. And I was like, I'm out of here. I cannot do this. I cannot be on the plane right now. Like
totally.
That was bad.
All right, folks, I want to take a second to talk about the partnership in today's episode, which is brought to us by Safety Wing Insurance. If you know me, obviously, you've listened to our podcast, you've seen our social media. I'm a very risk-averse person. And what I really mean by that is I just like to have a plan for when things do go wrong, making sure that we always have kind of a safety out, if you will. And Safety Wing Insurance is a company that is specifically designed for remote workers and digital nomads. How do you make sure that you stay safe while you're country hopping? Or what do you do if you catch a bug, get into an accident, or if your passport is stolen? Safety Wing Insurance offers travel medical insurance that's specifically designed for the needs of freelancers, remote workers, digital nomads, no matter where you are in the world. They have an ambitious mission to create a global social safety net for anybody, regardless of where you were born. With Safety Wing, you're covered all over the world with one policy. It's a monthly subscription, so you're continuously covered. You can turn it off at any time. You come back home, turn it off. They just recently launched a new version of their Nomad insurance product with a $0 deductible and a new claim process. It takes less than 5 minutes to fill in, which, of course, adds to so much, such a huge convenience factor for insurance stuff when that claim is so easy to fill out. If this sounds like something that's right for you and your adventures, check out the link in my show notes and make sure you save it for your next trip, which you can buy even if you're already traveling. So a couple of the features of Safety Wing here: $0 deductibles, meaning you're covered for even the smallest of claims. No pre-approval needed. It takes 5 minutes to purchase. You can do it the same day you fly out, or if your trip has already begun, you can still do it. Pay-as-you-go subscription, cancel anytime. Coverage is just a few dollars a day. Covers things like travel delays, lost luggage, trip interruption. Kids under 10, this is a really cool one. If you're a family traveling on a budget, kids under 10 go free with an adult policy, covering you in over 180 countries. 24/7 online customer care with a less than 1 minute response time. Travel medical insurance with a medical expense up to $250,000. You can add on electronic theft insurance for up to $3,000 worth of electronic valuables as well. So if you're traveling with cameras, computers, things like that, you can add that on if you like. Check them out, Safety Wing Insurance, in the show notes below.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing progress. It's so cool to see it. And follow-up question, actually, I'm not sure that I know the answer. Did you end up going on that trip ultimately?
Yeah, it was on the way home, so I had no choice.
Oh.
But I did I think I got a flight like late that afternoon, and my husband was like, well, I hope our skis are still there. Like, good. Like, I don't know. And so I had to find our stuff when we got there. It was a whole thing. It was bad. It was really bad. I would not recommend it. But I will say it was a United flight, and I will say the crew was fantastic. I got off and they were like, this does happen sometimes. Like, it's okay. And I was like, well, don't tell me that. That's like an out for next time. Like, I don't need to know that this is a thing that happens. But yeah, I did end up getting home, and yeah, now I'm flying every weekend voluntarily, not because I have to. And
isn't that something?
It's a little bit of a joke because I have sort of started to appreciate planes a little bit. And so now I'm flying a Cirrus, and we're looking at these Cirrus ads, and my husband is like, why are you looking at a Cirrus ad? Like, why are you doing that? Like, what do you think you're going to buy a plane one day? Like, what is happening?
You're like, yeah,
so
dude.
I do think I'm sort of like shifting over to like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. There are still some nerves that we're working through, but I do think I'm like getting into it now for sure.
It's awesome. Have you found the build your own Cirrus on their Cirrus website yet? Have you designed your own paint scheme?
I have. I have found one.
Yeah.
I have definitely found one.
That's the first step. So there's some pretty cool stuff that you can do out there. And as you and I have talked about, I have some friends that work for Cirrus, and they do the demo flights. And I've gotten the pleasure to go fly one of those airplanes, and what a spectacular machine that is. So I'm glad that you're enjoying that. And one thing I'll also throw out there, for the folks that are listening to this, Kristin is flying in some of the most complex airspace that we have in the United States, arguably the most complex. She's in Washington, D.C., and the airspace that's out there is all surrounding, of course, the White House, the Capitol, these highly, sensitive security areas. And so she has to navigate that. She has to navigate these large, what we call Class Bravo airspace, which is the airspace around the largest airports in the nation. She has to deal with that. It's heavy flight training. I mean, it is very, very busy out there. It's not like you're doing this in the middle of, podunk, somewhere mid-country where there's not another airplane in the sky. You're making this thing as challenging on yourself as you possibly can, which, growing up, my dad always told me, do it the hard way first and everything else is easy. And I would say that you are embodying that as far as it comes to learning how to fly.
Yeah, I will say there's definitely some challenges with it, right? Because we do have I'm learning out of Leesburg Executive Airport. So it's a towered airport. We are in Dulles airspace, which is incredibly busy. So, I know right now, like, we take off and then we like go to our maneuvering area, like get out of it. This is where we go. But I think it was last weekend, actually, my flight instructor was like, we're going to do something a little different. And so he was like, you see that? That's restricted airspace. He pulls up the sectional chart and he's like, that's restricted and that's restricted. And you're going to navigate between all the restricted airspace today. Like, that's going to be the path we take. And like, hold on, let me just check to make sure it's not extended and all these things. So I think it's good because I'm flying and I'm thinking about navigating around restricted airspace, and I'm not thinking about how terrified I am up there, and kind of working through the nerves and really understanding there's so much more to it than just flying. Flying is actually the easy part. The hard part of being a pilot is, the navigation and the systems and the communications and where are all the other planes in the space. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, we got up there and he said, okay, like fly to that mountain. I flew to that mountain. He went, turn around. And I made a turn. And I was like, oh, I have no idea if I turned us around or I just made a turn. Like I have zero idea of what direction I'm going. Hold on a second.
That's so funny.
So kind of learning all of those pieces. And then, you layer the Dulles kind of national capital region airspace into it. It definitely brings a layer of complexity and just sort of a layer of respect of what air traffic control does and sort of the importance of looking out the window, understanding all the systems we have available to communicate to other pilots while you're up there, and really kind of understand everything at that level, not just flying, but how complex being a pilot actually is.
Yeah, and you just said something that kind of struck a key with me, and that's the level of respect that comes from just how amazing the air traffic control system and airspace system is in the United States. I mean, this is worldwide too, but in the United States, we have significantly more general aviation traffic than anywhere else in the world. And general aviation meaning small airplanes, little 2-seaters, 4-seaters, 6-seaters, those sort of airplanes. And they seamlessly integrate with the airliner traffic. Airliners scan for those airplanes as we're flying into these major airports. So, Kristin would never do this, but if some other pilot was up there and was in the wrong spot at the wrong time and our airliner was coming in on approach to Dulles, we could see that airplane on our systems and it will tell us to get away from them. It's called a traffic collision avoidance system. We get both a TA, which is a traffic advisory, and an RA, which is a resolution advisory. And that tells us exactly how to get away from that traffic, whether it's climb, descend. And it's just amazing at how well those systems come together. And in my 10 years of professional flying now, I think I've had 2 resolution advisories, and they were long before we ever became a collision factor with these other airplanes. One was going into LA and one going into, I believe, Denver, if memory serves. But they were so minor, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, we just climb away from this person. We go through the procedures. Again, it's something we train all the time. But I just continue to be impressed with how well it all integrates together and the true levels of safety that are present across the aviation industry, not only in the commercial aviation industry, but in general aviation as well. So it's again, fun for me to watch you go through this and learn all of this stuff. And I guess my final question for you is, any other suggestions or advice you have for folks that may be in your shoes that are nervous flyers?
I think embrace being nervous, which doesn't make sense. But I think if just admitting like, I'm a nervous flyer and I need to do something about it, because you don't have to be miserable. Like there are other people who are miserable too. And there are things out there that can help you. And I think everyone needs to try different things. For me, knowledge was the thing that really kind of pushed me over the edge of it and to really kind of help move me forward. But I think there's so many resources out there, and you don't have to live in this like constant state of anxiety about it, but embrace being nervous and being like, okay, I'm really nervous about this. I'm going to do something about it and really take an active role, because it's not going to happen in one 15-minute phone call. It's going to take I've talked to all of the Gila pilots, I think at this point. It's going to take a lot of calls. And sometimes even if you don't know what to ask, just say like, I don't know, how do planes stay in the sky? Like just ask a question and really kind of embrace the anxiety around it and push it and see kind of what information you can find out there that will help you.
Absolutely. No, I think that's sound advice. And one of the things that, Kristin, I really haven't mentioned much of as an option that we have, but one of the things that you and I work together on is kind of the monthly recurring calls that happen twice a month as of right now. And we actually have plans to increase that, but that's something that's been really great too, because we can jump on and it's an hour that's cut out for this, but we'll have conversations for 20, 30, 45 minutes about what's going on. And I think that's a nice little way for us to kind of continue connecting about, where you're at and things that you're doing. So I know that I found that great on my side of things, as far as, being able to connect with everybody and learn what we can do better to best support you. So I, of course, hope that's been a positive what am I trying to say here? Beneficial for you as well. So,
Absolutely. I love the ongoing calls. I think it's really helpful. As I said, like, I don't think one 15-minute phone call is going to make anybody go from a nervous flyer to not nervous. I think it's ongoing. And I think too, with just sort of the sensationalism that happens around any sort of incident in the aviation community, having the constant sort of dialogue around it and just saying like, yeah, I'm nervous and I need to keep talking about it and keep learning about it, I think has been really helpful. And also we've made a lot of friends. Like, as you said, like everyone tracks each other's flights. Everyone's like, oh, I'm going on a trip. Like, here's my flight number. And it's been cool to kind of be part of that community.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. We have a really good group of folks that are just genuinely great people. So I'm excited about it. But Kristin, I think that's about all the questions I have for you today. I again am so grateful to have the opportunity to work with you, and grateful that you took the time to share your story with everybody. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of folks. That's all I have. Anything else that you'd like to throw in here at the end?
No, not for me. This has been awesome. Thanks for having me on.